bottom of the Gemara, and what happened here was Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan about the halacha that everybody lanes Megillah on a different day. Kfarim go be a Maknisa, or Yer Kedolos, and Yudalid, Mukavas Chayma, on your Tesvav. Why can't we get our act together? Why isn't there a problem of Lois is going to do? So Rabbi Yochanan asked him, and you never ever saw a problem besides this problem that you're asking Dafka by Purim. We know the halacha is when it comes to Yibum, if there's a Tzoras Erva, Beisil says the Tzoras Erva is also to do Yibum on, and Beishamai holds you could do Yibum on the Tzara. Why is there no problem of Lois is going to do over there? So why, Rish Lakish, you're only asking about the days that we lay in the Megillah on Purim? Ask about Yibum. So the Gemara answered, and now we're right on the top of Yudala and Aleph. Mi Sovras, Osu Beishamai Kedivreim, Loy Osu Beishamai Kedivreim. Even though Beishamai Paskin that you're supposed to do Yibum on the Tzoras Erva, that was academic. They didn't fear it that way. So therefore, in fact, there was no Lois going to do. Everybody actually practiced the same way. So now we're going to get into the whole sugya of when there was machlokes between Beishamai and Beisil. How did they fear zich? What did they do?
Tell me where the Rashi was that you mentioned before we go weiter. The Rashi that says that they trusted each other in order to do in order to be able to make sure.
That's Rashi on the Mishnah. Rashi says loy nimnu. So Rashi says towards the bottom of that Rashi, you'd gimel on base. Right before the Gemara, in Rashi there's a big thing. It says Gemara. It tells you when the Mishnah is over. So right above that, maybe 8 lines above that, it says, 4 lines above it. Now the Gemara has a discussion about this. This might not necessarily be the maskana. There's a lot of discussion about this, because if Beishamai acted like Beisil, the whole thing is not relevant, right? So Zok to Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, what are you talking about? Asu v'asu shenein did they do like their own psak? And there's a shaila why. What's the listen of asu v'asu? They shenein mo did it. Could be even for Hesha. Ubeflukta the Rav Shmuel. There's actually machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Good morning. There's actually machlokes Rav and Shmuel. What Beishamai did? Did they follow their own psak or did they follow the psak of Beisil? The Rav Omer loy asu Beishamai kedevrayim. Beishamai didn't follow their own psak, rather they followed the halacha, which is Beisil. Or Shmuel Amar asu v'asu, they did. So the question here is Amos. When is this question whether or not Beishamai followed their own opinion? Because we know there was a baskel that came out that announced halacha to Beisil. If it was before that came out, well, the night timer demand Amar loy asu. Why wouldn't they have followed their own opinions? And if it's after the baskel came out, well then my time demand Amar asu. How could you explain why they would ignore the baskel? Zok to Gemara, either way we can explain both studies. Beisil was right. So therefore, Leman the Amar Loyasu, according to the Shita that Beishamai did not do what they said, rather they followed Beisil, was the Ha Beisil Ruba. Beisil was right, and they went Basirayv, Acherabim Lahatos. The Mandamar Asu and the Mandamar that holds they followed their own way. I Beisil was right. So they held Kiyaz Linan Basaruba Hechadechiyadadin. If both the parties to the Machlokes are on the same level, sure, you follow the right. But Hacha Beishamai Mechaded Itvei. Beishamai were sharper. And maybe the halacha of Acher Rab Lahatos does not apply. Kamash Malan the Baskel, the Forship explained, Kamash on the Baskel that you say Acher Rab Lahatos, even in a case where those who are the Miyut are Mechaded Itvei. It's brought down that even though Beishamai was Mechaded Itvei, we follow the right of Basil because that's how we understand things. But Los Lavoi, when Mashiach comes, when our brains are able to process and understand Beishamai better, then could be we're going to even pass along like Beishamai.
Seems to me that they still also agree that Basham was sharper. So if they wouldn't have, then that's just the way everybody.
I hear. Before Sema, la'acher baskol, or maybe it was after the baskol. Mandamar lo yasu. The mandamar held that Beis Shammai followed the psak of Beis Hillel is the hanafka baskol. They follow the baskol. Mandamar asu, and the people who hold that they ignore the baskol, it's Rabbi Yosui. The Amar ein mashkichem bebaskol.
Yosy.
Yes.
Did the Baskal also tell you the few halachas that we go according to Beis Shammai, or how did we, like, why did we?
I guess it must have. It must
Okay.
have. That's a very good point. If there's a baskol, how come we don't follow Beis Hillel all the time? It's a very good point.
Didn't they come to that in the attic? Didn't they have a conference in the attic where they decided how they were going to possibly like Beis Shammai? We had that going on.
It could be. I don't remember the Gemara. It wasn't today, so I don't remember it.
What would be the point of the Baskol then? If you don't paskin like it, and who is that Baskol? Is that the Rebbeinu Shalom?
These are all good questions. So let's see what Tosh gives a little bit more insight on how this baskol works. Sometimes you listen to it, sometimes you don't listen to it. So also Beis Shammai kedivreim. Tema ha'ashkechan. You find sometimes that Beis Shammai did do it because it says the heater of Tarvin kedivrei Beis Shammai. Tarvin was leaned by Krishma, Beis Shammai. Remember the Gemara said you deserve to be in danger because you follow Beis Shammai. The Hillel Shehevi Eilasei Lazara. The Chavrul of Talmidei Shammai. We had a story where Hillel brought his Oila to the Azara, and that was a shaila if you're allowed to bring the Oila Shriya and Yom Tov. So there were other cases. So we're going to soon see that there were times where the Shammai did follow their own way. So here's the important touches. All touches are important. This is the touches that I wanted to highlight. Dem timer fragt Tosfos. Dem timer umay shna de like kaimelan kabaskol der Belazar, but the machlokes of the Belazar, there they didn't listen to the baskol, right? They said Torah loy b'shamayim. So that's what David Dolt is asking. How do you know when to follow the baskol and when not? Elamin b'chal duchti de shamuti. We say Rabbi Belazar shamuti, even though they were made alav and hashamayim with the baskol. That in fact he was right. Vein alach gemaisa uchabaskol. I'm sorry, by Rabbi Lazar, we didn't follow the simonim from Shemayim that are coming out and saying Rabbi Lazar is right. So how do you know when to baskel and when not? The baskel didn't come out spontaneous. The baskel came out because it was prompted by Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar says, if I'm right, they should come up with Shemayim and say like me. That's not a spontaneous baskol. That's in the Sarusa de la Sata, not in the Sarusa de la Ela. Because Amar Hasam, Inami, Bahi baskol, Shahoisa connected Rabbim, that baskol was connected to Rabbim. The Rabbanan have a ruba. They're the Vada in Allah. Avoka baskol de Basil, Kaimalon, we do baskol like Mishom, the Habib Basil ruba. Because anyway, we go Basaroy. The baskol was just cementing that. The chiddush of the baskol is el de b'shamim mechad de tvei. The chiddush of the baskol is that you go Basaroy even when the miyot is mechad de tvei. So, in the case of Rabbi Lazar, you don't listen to the baskol for two reasons. The baskol was going keneged A, and B is the baskol didn't come out spontaneous. It didn't come out by itself. It came out because Rabbi Lazar demanded that it comes out. In fact, Dafka Hasam Ka'amar, the Ein Mashkichin Kidipirashnu of Ba'amaloi. So Oibazoi, maybe since we're explaining here in Tosfos that there were specific reasons why you don't listen to a baskol over there, A, because Rabbi Lazar called for it, and B, he was against the right. So how do you have this general rule that there be shul and Mashkichin Baskol even in our case? There's special reasons why it was Ein Mashkichin Baskol. The Shlomo Rabbi Yeshua Hailishna. We bought Rabbi Yeshua chapped in such a loshman of Ein Mashkichin Baskol, definitive tzak. From Rabbi Yeshua's expression, it was mashma that it wasn't just because of that incident. They didn't listen to the baskol, rather it's a general rule, ein mashkichin b'baskol. Okay, so now we're going to get back to our sugi. Umandamar also, if you hold that Beis Shammai followed the psak, Korean kanlois is going to do loisaso good eyes. So this was Rabbi Yechidin's response to Rish Lakish. It was a long, drawn-out shtickle. But now we got to the end of Rabbi Yochanan's point. Why are you, Rish Lakish, asking about Lois Goydidu by the Megillah? Why didn't you ask it in Yevamos? The answer could be, I'd rather learn Maseches Megillah than Maseches Yevamos. Zok Gemara Amar Abaye, ki. It was mud, yeah. Amar Abaye, ki. I'm reading Lois Goydidu. I could be Rish Yochan tells Rish Lakish. You mean before you finish Chas once and you don't know the Klor, you're coming to ask me questions? You must have done Yevamos already. Amar Abaye, ki. I'm reading Lois Goydidu. When do we say that the problem of Lois Goydidu? It's going shtei batei dinim be'ir achas. If you have two batei dinim in one city, think of New York. Halalum be'ir achas. Halalum moedim kedivrei Beishamai, moirim kedivrei Beishamai. Halalum moirim kedivrei Zil. That will be a steer. In one city, you have two batei dinim going in two directions. Imagine New York City. 45, 48. Don't worry, the Gemara is going to back off from this slaughter. But if it's in two different cities, less lanba, then it won't be a problem. Now, so frankly, that's like it's in one city. Ella Amarava Kamin is going to do is going bezdin bir achas. If you have a bezdin in one city, and it's the one bezdin only, and the bezdin itself is split. Halak, Plag Morin Kediv Beshamai. Half of the same bezdin, passes like Beshamai. Plag Morin Kediv Hill, that's a problem. But even Shtei Batei Dinim Bir Achas less than wouldn't be a problem. So that now we took care of Brooklyn. Brooklyn's all taking care of Shmuel, okay? Doesn't matter which problem it is, as long as it's not the same bezdin. Well, if 3 days on the Paskin one way and 3 days on Paskin another way, that's when you have a problem. Now we have a little bit of a problem because that's for the first kash, the first territory the Gemara wanted to offer is it's only a problem if it's in one city. But if it's in two different cities, then it's not a problem, right? Well, so then what's the whole issue with what's going to do by Megillah? We're talking about different cities, right? This city lends Tesval, this city lends Yudal. So the kash is also going to be family. So Tosfos teaches us an important halacha in Hilchas Lois going to do. No, in Hilchas Megillah. I'm sorry, in Hilchas Kriyas Megillah. So Zok Tosfos Ki Amina Lois going to kon shtei batim b'yachas from timer matirts mi Megillah the be'ir achas how you koyin levnei ir be'yudalit ulevnei kfarim how you makdim liyam maknisa. So there it was all in different cities. In one city it was yudalit, in a different city it was liyam maknisa. No, I'm sorry, it's fair. It's fair. I apologize. Right. Forget in the same city, in the big city, they would lay on your dalit, but the kfarim, the bnei kfarim came in. The bnei kfarim came in to the big city to lay on your mechnisa. So how could you say there's no problem what it's going to do if it's in different cities? This was the same city. How does it help for Megillah? The Megillah was in the same city. Oh, you see, Reb Chaim already was in the time of Tosfos. The bnei kfarim. How you current be Iran? You know where they laid the bnei kfarim? They laid in their own cities. They did not come. They didn't need the Bakar from the big city. They actually had Bakar in their little cities. So Tosfos brings a raya from here that the Kriyas Megillah, even by the bnei kfarim, was in their cities. Now it ends up being in two different cities. There would be no lois going to do if we're in different cities. We know what Megillah, the whole part is they're coming in anyway, so they lay in when they come in. Isn't it much when they lay in the big cities? Father Curly Maknisa is Lafisha Be'iram, who you misasim, Lavai Levis Aknesis, Besheni Bechmichi looks at Torah. In the Derfalak, in the villages, they would get together to lay on Shnei Bechmichi. But it was actually in the little villages that the Kriyas on Megillah went on. The Chenir Dama B'Yishalmi, it says in Yushalmi, the Ben Ir Ein Moitzi Ben Krach, Kol Shein Mechuyev B'Davar Ein Moitzi Achem Dechivasan, the Chivin Shabnei Akfarim Hayu B'Kiyam Likrais Vaday Hayu Karen B'iram. They lay in their own little villages. I don't remember. That was before yesterday.
They sort of congregated first, and they went before they went to the big city.
I guess so.
Everybody in that little city.
It must have, yeah. Their Megillah day was the Monday or Thursday before. Yeah. Okay, so let's see what we have over here. So the Gemara says the problem of Lois is going to do is if it's in one beis and split, then you have a problem. But if it's in one city, but it's two different batei dinim, then it would not be a problem. So that's what we're now discussing: is did the Shammai do like themselves, and is there a problem with Lashis Kodesh? So Tashma. So that is the subject matter of today's Gemara. That's why by here in Chalamai, the Manichet film have to go into a different room. Yeah, I think I mentioned yesterday that the Paskim that if you're a nusach is nusach svart and you're davening in a shul where they daven nusach Ashkenaz or vice versa. So for things that are said loud, such as kedusha, of course you have to say the kedusha like the minig of the place that you're in. But Shemona Esrei, which is Tefillah Balachash, which no one hears, there you should say it the way your nusach is. And if Moshe clears what's the halacha by Psukkah de Zimra. Are you supposed to, if you daven nusach svard in the nusach Ashkenaz place, like I did for 8 years, do you say Psukkah de Zimra like nusach svard, or do you say it like the nusach of the yeshiva that you're in?
Why don't we talk to you just like you said before? If you say it loud, then you're gonna take.
Well, the shai, that was the shai. Are you supposed to say Psukkah de Zimra loud? That's going to tell you.
Then it's shy even before all of that.
Yeah, in the Chanami. So I don't know what the Moshe Paskins, but
If you're standing next to the Nachum bench, then you have to say it quiet.
okay. So Dr. Tashma, in the house of Rabbi Eliezer, are you cursing? Not in the house, in the city. Are you cursing? What if they need to do a bris on Shabbos? So how much preparation? At what stage of preparation are you allowed to engage in for Shabbos? So Rabbi Eliezer holds you're even allowed to do the hechsher. You're allowed to make a fire. You're allowed to cut wood to make a fire, to smelt metal to make a knife on Shabbos for the bris. That's what they did in Rabbi Eliezer's in his domain. Let's see what we have over here. In Rashi, are you cursing Eitzim leboy b'yoyim? Why could he last his barzel Ismail Shomila? The Kassa Rabbi Eliezer mechshir mitzvah doichin Shabbos k'mitzvah atzma, and they were makbid b'davka to do it that way. B'davka to do it that way. Tosha says, they b'davka made sure not to prepare a knife before Shabbos, so that they would have to do this entire thing: cut wood, make a fire, smelt metal. You know why? Mishum chibuk mitzvah. So they actively demonstrated to do this to show the chavivus of the mitzvah.
But they're putting aside this reason magdim in the mitzvahs. By that time, the bris is probably going to take place much later.
Maybe they did the night before.
Yeah, maybe they get it Friday night or like middle of the night. Yeah, it's a good idea. Shkoich Victor. That's right. So Rabbi Kiva, so that with Mekayim Rabbi Eliezer in, then Mekayim Rabbi Kiva loy. The Tanya we learned, Klal Omer Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva said, Kol Malacha She'ef Shalai Soy Shemer Shabbos, if it's a preparation that could have been done before Shabbos, Ein Doiches is Shabbos. It will not be Doiches Shabbos. So you clearly could have made your knife before Shabbos. So once again, you see over here that there was a problem of Loises Kodesh. Let's see what Rashi says over here. Yeah, so it must have been even in the same city, because we're saying in the same city there was a problem of Loises Kodesh.
Does the night of Bina have to be checked at the Challah?
I don't think so. The high might yufta. Frankly, what's the kasha b'chlal? Mekayim is shiny. Rabbi Kiva did not live in the same city as Rabbi Eliezer. And didn't we just say that if you're in a different city, it's not a problem of Loises Kodesh? Frankly, Gemara, that's a very good question. So udu ka'arila, my ka'arila. So what was the havamina to even raise such a question? Dr. Gemara, so kedai dechamina mishum chumer de Shabbos kamakam echadami kamashalam. For regular halachas, it doesn't make a difference if in one city they pass in one way and in another city they pass in a different way. It wouldn't be a problem unless it's going to. But Shabbos, which is so chomer, maybe the Gemara thought that it should be universal across the board, even from cities.
This was the big headache that they had, the Yidden had when they came to America with the Basham and Safaru. The Yidden the Chassidim were being the Kabbalah Shabbos and driving to shul after dark.
That's right.
And you have to make it universal.
Tashma, Rabbi Vo, ki ikla la'asrei Rabbi Shua ben Levi. When Rabbi Vo would come to the city of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, have a metaltal shraga, there he would he would move around a candle. So it cannot be a lit one. Rashi says it's only a shaila of muksa. It could not be a shaila. It could not be a shaila of an issue deraisa. So when he
That problem is good. Other doing what that locale did.
but how could one person do two different things?
That's not a problem.
The Gemara is asked that. That's what the Gemara's question is. That's what the Gemara's question. How can you do two different
Do
things?
like the Romans.
Oh, very good, very good. The Gemara is going to discuss that. So the Chi'ikla Asher Yechon Lo Yevon Tal B'Shraga. Pick me behind my kasha. What's the kasha? Will I read him a kaimis b'kaimis shiny? Moti's question: when in Rome, there was the Romans. When he was in the city where the minig was to carry, he did. When he was in the city where the minig was not to carry in there, he didn't carry. Tosh, that's another kasha. Just because he wasn't carrying it, that doesn't show that he doesn't carry. Maybe he didn't need it, right? Like we had before, just because a guy doesn't work in Erev Pesach, who said to him he's in Malacha? Maybe he doesn't have a job, right? So Toshva says, just because you didn't see a guy carrying it there around, that proves he owes a saucer, make a desa. If the nair fell on his becket, he wouldn't take it off. So you see clearly he did things to demonstrate that he held Isser. How did Rabbi Vo himself have two different piskei halachos? So Gemara the Teretz, Rabbi Vo, Rabbi Shua Levi Svirlei, Be'etzim he held that you were allowed to carry them there. But when he came to Rabbi Yochanan's city, who forbade it, they'll have him a taltal, which is Rabbi Yochanan, which is what Mati said. Out of respect for Rabbi Yochanan. Break the Gemara about Ika Shama, but what about his Shamas? His Shamas who wasn't such a Talmud Chacham like him, who knows that this is the city of Rabbi Yochanan, who answers, and that was the city of Shuma Levi, and he might not realize that, and he might say you're allowed to carry everywhere. So the Gemara, the Moedele the Shama, he told his Shamas that, by the way, the only reason why I'm not carrying here is because of Rabbi Yochanan, but Be'etzim we hold that you're allowed.
You don't want to undermine the authority
Of the place that you're in. That's right. Tashma, even though in our case, where Beis Hillel says you wouldn't be allowed to do Yibam with the Tzaras Ereva, and Beis Shammai holds you do the Yibam with the Tzaras Ereva, nevertheless, like Nimnu Beis Shammai, Milisa Nashim mi Beis Hillel, like Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai. If you're going to say that Beis Shammai complied with the halacha of Beis Hillel, Mishum Hachila Nimnu, that would explain why Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel didn't have a problem marrying each other. Eliyamart also, if Beis Shammai made Yibum under the same circumstances where Beis Hillel would hold that the Isser Karish and the child would be a mamzer, Amayla Nimnu. So we don't have this svara that Rashi told us because Beis Shammai would declare it. Right now we're dealing with the raw data. And if in fact that Beis Shammai allowed such a yibum to occur when Beis Hillel held that was chayiv karis, it's very fair. I understand why Beis Shammai didn't have a problem with Beis Hillel, because from Beis Shammai's perspective, these women were not allowed to marry. They needed chalitza, and they didn't do chalitza. So when they remarried without getting chalitza, they were over an Isser Lav, right? So that didn't bother them. Their children at worst were children of a Isser Lav, which doesn't create a Vlad as a mamzer. So therefore, Beis Shammai would marry children from Beis Hillel. Worst comes to worst, they were b'nei chayv elav. Ela Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai, amai loy nimnu. Why didn't they refrain from being mishadach with them? B'nei chayv krisis mamzerim nimnu. From Beis Hillel's perspective, the children of Beis Shammai were mamzerim. So how could Beis Hillel have been mishadach with people from Beis Shammai? And if you're going to say, Beis Hillel, Beis Hillel, they mamzer mechayv krisos, that they held that even chayv krisos there's no mamzer. Even though they argued about betzaros, moedim shein mamzer ela mimishe suray isur erva, the onush karis. They were moeda that there would not be a mamzer. So let's see Rashi. because there would only be a mamzer from a chiv Mrs. Bezdin. So I must have missed a line in the Gemara because Rashi brings down basar oif b'chalav. Where did I miss that?
I could be with it, but I didn't-
No, I must have missed a line in the Gemara.
It's the last line. Where's the-
Oh, I apologize.
didn't talk about
No,
it,
I
but-
missed it.
Because
Oh, I missed it.
told you the letter became-
Oh, I knew I missed it, but I didn't know where it was. In the also here's the Gemara answered. So the Gemara answered this Mekaymis. No, I totally missed that line. I apologize
It was almost irrelevant in the Gemara, so.
because there was another case that we're asking from as well. So let's see Rashi. I knew I was missing a lot of Rashis and I couldn't figure out where the Rashis went. So you darish v'chalev imay davka if the mother has milk, a bird doesn't have milk. A bird doesn't have milk. Mike Arila, what was the kasha? Was only in one city. This is the Rashi I wanted. What was exactly the Isser that we were discussing there? So the Ner was lit on Shabbos, so it became Muksa. But the cover, now the flame went out. So now you just have the receptacle with oil. To Savala Yeshua Reb Shimon, the less like Muksa. Reb Shimon doesn't hold of Muksa. The reason why Reb Yeshua held you're allowed to carry this, even though normally you would take Muksa, but he doesn't hold of Muksa only in extreme cases. Reb Yechon Savala Reb Yudah, the Islam Muksa, Afilu Shalom Machmas Isser, even if there's no Isser out. But Ika Shama, what about the Shamis who would not be aware of what Rebbe Vo was doing? Why here he would be makbid not to be metal to this muksa, and there he wasn't concerned. The Shamei the Rebbe Vo, he doesn't know the details of the halachas. And he might be metal in the city of Rebbe Yochanan. Since he sees Rebbe Vo normally does carry, that's his minig. He's not concerned about the muksa, so he wouldn't know or Rebbe Yochanan city not to. So the Silos, women who married out, even though they didn't have chalitza, they would be b'nei chayv elabanin. Hanach lebeisilo, shatzaris nisos l'shuk b'loy chalitza. Beisilo held that they didn't need chalitza; they weren't chayv and even at all. Afidul lebeshamai, the army chalitza boy. Even if you hold like beshamai, that each woman needed a chalitza, and they were over allowed by marrying without chalitza, b'lav ba'amaninu. What's the lav? Loisia eshes hameis. There's no problem with mamzer. But Beisilil, on the other hand, they did look at Beishamai's halacha like making mamzerim, because if you do yibim on a woman who's usher to you, it's an isha eshesach chayve krisininu. Even the tzaris habas betura, since tzaris habas is part from yibim, hamayabma oimid beisher eshesach bekaris. So Zok Gemara, maybe they held that ein mamzer mechayve krisos el mechayve mises bezdin. The only type of arayis that make the child a mamzer is if there's a chiv Mrs. Bezdin on the erva. For instance, going imay, the chamoitoi, the chalasoi, where it's not chorus, rather than Mrs. Bezdin, the chayotzeben. The chol hanech isher achva less b'misa. But all of these other misois, all of the other arayis, like eshes ach, like your brother's wife, there's no chiv misa b'dei adam. It's only a chiv misa b'dei shemayim. So Zok to Gemara, go all the way back down to the Gemara. You cannot say that because so you see, everybody agrees that the child is a mamzer if it's correct. So how could Beisilo have married into the families of Beishamai, where from Beisilo's perspective, some of Beishamai's children could be mamzerim in the event that they did yibum where yibum was not called.
What's wrong with the way Rashi learned?
That is the way Rashi learned.
No, I mean they were able to marry.
Because Rashi already knows the mashkan of the Gemara. Rashi's shot of the Mishnah is based on the Gemara. Elalav shmamina. You have to prove from here that loy also Beishamai could not have acted on their psak. Because otherwise, how could Beisil have been the shaduk with them? So but the moidelahu, this is what Rashi is referring to. But even though they did fear zechadibum, and from Beisil's perspective, those children were mamzerim, but it was on the resume. They made sure to have on the shidduch resume, this is a child who was born from a case of Yibum where they were miyabim the Torah. They didn't say mom. They said this is the case of a child who was born out of a zivug that was Yibum. Uparshi, therefore they wouldn't be mishadach for those families. I guess they kept it as long as they had to.
They have to keep it forever. There's a mom forever.
Why would anybody do it anyway?
Well, why could you just do chalitza? Good question.
There's a mitzvah. What do you mean do chalitza? There's a mitzvah.
After the war, probably, and create them there that they should have on the resume for the rest of their life.
Not known to the longer. They don't live that long. Remember, someone opening a number, nothing Thursday. Now you'll have a long life.
But anyway, they'll never tell them. I'm saying. The Katani Sefer. It depends if you hold like Abashol or not. Depends on who you hold like. If you hold like Abashol, it's a bigger reason to chalitza. The Katani Sefer. Call out the hirers. Shahayu, Elu, Matarin, Elu Matamin. The Mishnah also says, in addition to Yibum, there were many halachas of Tum and Tyre where there was a machlokes Basham and Basil. Le'nimnu oisim Tyres Elu Gabi Elu. There, the only way you can explain that is because there was a declaration. It was disclosed, and therefore they were able to use each other's Tyres. So let's see the Gemara on Daf Yud Daled Beis. If the explanation for this is because Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel disclosed anything that was disputed amongst them, that would make sense why they used each other's kalim. If this was not disclosed, Beis Shammai borrowed from Beis Hillel because the cases that we're referring to are the Tmeos Beis Hillel Beis Shammai Taharis. The disputed areas, the way this Nusach and the Gemara is learning, there's a couple of machlokes in where Beis Hillel was machmer and said it's tamei, and Beis Shammai said it's tar. So of course Beis Shammai would use kalim from Beis Hillel because from Beis Shammai's perspective they're tar. Ela Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai lama lo nimnu. How could Beis Hillel borrow these kalim from Beis Shammai? Hires the Beis Shammai kalim that Beis Shammai might consider to be tar. Le Beis Hillel tameis ninu. Ela lav the maidalahu shemami na. So you have a raya from here that they disagree, but in all those areas where there was disagreement between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they made sure to disclose what they did so that they could each refrain from being nichshel in what was an affair from their perspective. Prat.
How can Beis Hillel lend?
So on the
Caleb-
resume, there were different sections. There's different sections. That's right. There's a lot of information on the, yeah. But Moti, the good thing is you didn't have to put references. You know why? Because the person wrote about himself and they trusted each other. I'm a nice guy or I'm a low life. So that was all on the resume. You didn't have to ask because you see they were erlich. You see they disclosed everything. If there's full disclosure, you don't need to ask. Okay, so
How can Beis Hillel lend Kalim to Beis Shammai that they believe are tamei? Aren't they going to be making, according
they
to their
wouldn't lend those
shita?
kalim out. No, those kalim they wouldn't lend out. If it was such a situation, they would have toibled it. If it was a metal keli,
Yeah. So what are they lending? Here? So what are they lending?
Sorry?
What is Beis Hillel lending Beis Shammai?
Caleb, they borrowed Caleb from each other, not needing to worry that it could be tamei.
But according to Beis Hillel, is it not tamei? According to Beis Shammai, it's tahor.
Those Caleb Beis Hillel already fixed, right? Any Caleb, Beis Shammai can assume if we're borrowing something from Beis Hillel, it's for sure tahor. Because if something became tamei, no matter according to whose standards, Beis Hillel would have fixed that.
Okay.
Okay, Zok the Gemara Shema Mina.
Victor, now that there's no screen here, you gotta come. Can't see you on the wall.
Umay home, the hach. I don't understand. We had an R Mishnah regarding Yibum that they were marrying each other, so it's a raya, they must have disclosed it. And you didn't want to accept it. But you brought me a raya from Tumat Ahira that they disclosed it. Why is it more of a raya from Tumat Ahira that there was disclosure? Why is that any more of a raya than it is by Yibum? Maybe they didn't disclose. Maybe Beis Shammai didn't disclose when a child was a product of the Yibum and the Tzara. Because that's something that people talk about. Yibum is not an everyday occurrence. And if Yibum happens with a Tzara, people would have talked about it. So there's no need for disclosure. But by Caleb, nobody keeps track of everybody else's Caleb. Nobody knows if the Caleb becomes Tameh. Kamash Malon, that clearly there it must be because they disclosed it. Okay, Gufa. Now we're going to go back to a comment that we learned at the bottom of Amud Beis, at the bottom of Amud Aleph. Amr Lezer. Even though there was a machlokes about tzaris, where Beis Shammai says they should do yibum and Beis Hillel said not, moedim they all agree she'ein mamzer. It's only a mamzer ela mimi she'isura iser erva v'al nishkaretz. So what do you mean moida? Exactly how is this relevant in this case that they're moida that there's only a mamzer from an iser erva? So man moedim, who agrees to who? If it's Beis Shammai agrees to Beis Hillel that it's only considered a mamzer if there's an iser charis, shita it's pashut because b'nei chayve lavin sherim ninu. We know that b'nei chayve lavin are kosher. I don't need this Mishnah. I don't need Beliezer to tell me that. Ella must be Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel is moed to Beis Shammai that one does become a mamzer. One is a mamzer if it's a child of a chayiv creatures. Correct. I don't understand. What do you mean moed? The case that we're discussing is exactly that case. That's the case where they're arguing, right? Exactly this case where Yibam is being done, and according to Beis Hillel, there's an Isher Eshazach. So he gufa chayver krisis. So what do you mean moida? Where is there a concession? So Beis Shammai le Beis Hillel. Really, who's moida? Beis Shammai is moida to Beis Hillel that chayve lavin do not net a mamzer. Why is that a chiddush? It's pocket. So tomorrow lofukim with Rabbi Akiva. It's coming to tell us that we don't pass like Rabbi Akiva. The Omer Yesh Mamzer Mechayv Elaven. Rabbi Akiva said, if you remember, we learned a couple of blot ago that Chayv Elaven Kedushin is not Taifus, and Bival Kedushin is not Taifus Mechayv Elaven. If someone marries a Chayv Elaven, the child is a Mamzer. Kamash Malon, Rabbi Lezer, that we don't pass like Rabbi Akiva, and we pass in Ein Mamzer Mechayv Elaven. And therefore, from Beis Shammai's perspective, even those women who married without Chalitza, which means they were Chayv Elaven, those children are not mamzerim, although Rabbi Akiva would have considered them mamzerim. Tashma, even though Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue by tzaris is the case of Yibum, which is another case that's mentioned later in the Gemara where there was a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. I forgot what the case of achayos were. What does he say?
4 brothers, 2 who married.
Oh, all right, that was the case. 2 were married to 2 sisters, and then 2 sisters fell to Yibum, to the other brothers, so they become Achosh Kukosu. That was one of the...
Both fell at the same time.
Right, they both fell at the same time. You cannot marry either one because it's going to be Achosh Kukosu. We discussed it. That was a complicated case. If one was also to one. That was Testament base, the complicated one. Yeah, exactly. And we looked at if one is usher to one because of a reason, and the other one for a reason, and all the 15 arise could find that. Okay. Beget Joshua is someone wrote his wife a get, and then he was miyachid with his wife afterwards. So maybe he was mabatal to get. Ubisafik esashish. If there's a suffix, if someone is an esashish, Rashi has different pshatim as what that might be referring to. Rashi says it might be referring to if a shchivmara gives his wife a get and says that if I die from this chayli, then you should be megreshus. So in the meantime, till he dies, we don't know if she's an eshish. Uve megarish as ishtoi velona ime bepundik, a woman who was megarish's wife, and then he spent the night with her. So the question is do we say that he's married to her again, or the kesef of b'shava kesef of puta b'shava pruta? There's a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel what the minimum value for kedushin is. Beis Shammai holds it's a much more expensive thing. It's a dinner kesef, while Beis Hillel holds it's just a small piece of copper, and therefore it's possible that someone would be considered married according to Beis Hillel, but not considered married according to Beis Shammai if there wasn't enough money for the kedushin. Nevertheless, lenimnu Beis Shammai milisa nashim Beis Hillel, v'lo Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai. L'lamdecha to teach you shechiba v'reyus hagen zebazeh. Even though they argued, they still loved each other. L'kayim hashenemar ha'emes v'ashalom ahavli. There's emes and shalom, and they still were able to work together and love each other. Reb Shimon Aimer, Reb Shimon says, Nimnu hein min havadai, when they knew for sure that there was a situation In other words, when Basil knew for sure that Beis Shammai did a yibum when it wasn't supposed to, they weren't meshadach. So, frank the Gemara. If you would say that Beis Shammai acted on their piskei halacha and they actually did what they paskin, mishum hachi nimnu, then according to Reb Shimon, it would make sense that Beis Shammai and Basil refrained from marrying each other, or especially Basil refrained from marrying Beis Shammai because Beis Shammai acted on their piskei halacha. If anyway they didn't do what they were supposed to do, what they paskin, then what would there be a reason why they should refrain? Frank the Marva Tizbra, Ni Nami de Asu. Even if Beis Shammai did do what they paskin, Bishlam Basil Nimnu Beis Shammai. That I understand why Basil will refrain from being mishadach with Beis Shammai. The chayv increases nunu umamzerim heim leBasil. According to Basil, there are certain scenarios like in Yibum where Basil would consider the children mamzerim. El Beis Shammai amai nimnu Basil. Why would they ever, even in the Makam Badai, why would Beis Shammai have refrained from being mishadach with Basil? B'nei chayv elavin, they're b'nei chayv elavin uksherim ninu, and they're kosher. So Tosfos asks, I don't understand. You're just focusing on one case of Yibum. There's many other cases like Kedushin where it could work out the opposite way, that according to Beis Hillel, she's a Neser Shish, and according to Beis Shammai, not. Yeah, but now we have a Bryce that says that by a Vadai, they did hold back. Till now, we said they didn't hold back. Now we're asking from Reb Shimon who says by a Vadai, they actually held back. So why would they have actually held back? So the question is the question that I just asked over here is, there's other cases where it would be an Isser for Beis Shammai and Mutter to Beis Hillel. So Tosfos says that even though it lists off all of these different cases where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue, we're really focusing on the case of Tzaros. And in the case of Tzaros, it's only Beis Hillel who would consider Beis Shammai a mamzer, but not vice versa. So Gemara could Amar Reb Nachman Yitzchak. What did Reb Nachman Yitzchak said? We're not talking about the children here. We're talking about the tzara itself. Hachanami le'nitzricha ela l'tzara atzma. Beis Shammai, we're not talking about the kids. Of course, the kids, according to Beis Shammai, the kids of Beis Hillel, at the worst could only be chayv elavin. But we're discussing the woman herself. They wouldn't marry the tzaras erva. Men, Beis Shammai would not allow their men to marry a woman who was a tzaras erva. Beis Hillel said she's a free woman, right? She's tzaras erva. She has no chiv yibum. Beis Shammai said, no, you cannot marry that woman. So we're not talking about their kids being mamzerim. We're talking about the woman herself. Beis Shammai said, no, you can't marry her until she gets a chalitza. Umayshna min avadai, the surahu. What's the difference where in the case of vadai, we say that Beis Shammai refrained from being meshadach with Beis Hillel and vice versa. Safek nami yisurahu. A safek deraisa, you're also not allowed to do. So why just because it's a safek would they be mekel? If they had a safek isser, of course they wouldn't listen to Beis Shammai. But if they didn't know at all that this woman might be also b'sakaris, if they didn't know minastam that this child could have been a child from such a marriage, they didn't ask questions because the moidelahu uparsh, because they relied on the fact that there would be full disclosure. And what do we learn from here? The hava of arayus mahagan zebazeh. Frank the Gemara, Hainu Reisha. Why do I need Reb Shimon in the safe of this brisa to tell me Nimnu and bring out a chiddush that they were like a half of arayus? Isn't that what the Tanna Kama says as well? So Gemara, you're right. The Tanna Kama did say that as well. Hakamash Malon, the Kula Reb Shimon. The chiddush is that even the Reisha of the Mishnah is consistent with Reb Shimon. Tashma, the Amar Reb Yechon Benuri. This is what Mati brought up originally when we looked at Gemara. Hey halachazu Ravachas b'Yisrael. How did Klal Yisrael process this machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? You have a massive problem because according to Beis Shammai you have to do yibum, and according to Beis Hillel you can't do yibum. Nasik divrei Beis Shammai have lad mamzer l'divrei Beis Hillel. If you follow Beis Shammai and you allow the yibum to occur at the tzara, the child will be a mamzer. Nasik divrei Beis Hillel have lad pagam l'divrei Beis Shammai because the vlad now is the child of a woman who wasn't allowed to marry with a lav, and she married l'chutz. So boyu unesakin lahem. Let's go fix it for them, l'tzaris, sheyiyu chaltzos v'loy b'shabbos, which is exactly what Mati's suggestion was. Why don't we just mandate chalitza? Zok Gemara, this is what Rabbi Yochanan Benuri wanted to do, but what happened was, well, you speak of ligmor esadavar at shenitr vasha. Rabbi Yochanan Benuri didn't have a chance to enact this legislation until it was too late and they didn't have a chance to do it anymore. I'm not sure what happened, but he couldn't get it done. Okay, let's stop here. The Mishnah will be mamshech tomorrow on Tesvav Amar Aleph. So basically, what we learned today was the question was: did Beis Shammai paskin like they said, or did they not paskin like what they said? And so far, the maskana of the Gemara seems to be is Beis Shammai did act on what they said, but since they provided full disclosure, there was never an Indian of a problem of them being mishadach with each other.
Shkoyach, Kassa, shkoyach.
Right, that the